The morning mist clung to the Columbia River like smoke from a dying fire, and Agent Sarah Chen sat perfectly still on bench 47, watching a man she'd been tracking for 3 months finally make his move. To anyone passing by, she looked like just another early riser enjoying her coffee and the quiet beauty of Riverside Park. Her worn leather messenger bag rested beside her, and a pair of binoculars hung casually around her neck, suggesting she was one of those dedicated birdwatchers who frequented the area. But beneath her unassuming appearance, Sarah was recording every detail of a weapons handoff that would prevent a terrorist attack on Portland's water supply. What she didn't know was that in exactly 17 minutes, her own government would become her biggest threat, and a routine morning of surveillance would turn into a fight for her career, her freedom, and possibly her life. Before we jump back tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Pacific Northwest had always been Sarah Chen's preferred operational theater. Something about the perpetual overcast skies and the way sound carried differently in the humid air made surveillance work feel almost meditative. At 38, she had spent the better part of 15 years moving through shadows for the Central Intelligence Agency, specializing in domestic counterterrorism operations that required the kind of patience most people couldn't fathom. Her assignment to Cedar Falls had begun 4 months ago when intelligence chatter suggested a cell was planning something catastrophic, involving the regional water infrastructure, the kind of attack that could poison hundreds of thousands of people and cripple the entire Pacific Northwest economy for years. Sarah adjusted her position slightly on the weathered wooden bench, her movements so subtle they wouldn't register to anyone watching. Her cover identity as Rebecca Walsh, a freelance nature photographer from Seattle, had taken weeks to establish. She'd rented a small apartment on Maple Street, joined the local hiking club, and even volunteered at the community garden. To the residents of Cedar Falls, she was just another transplant from the city seeking a slower pace of life. Her morning routine of coffee and bird watching at Riverside Park had become so consistent that the regular joggers now waved to her as they passed. The leather messenger bag beside her contained equipment worth more than most people's cars. Concealed within what appeared to be photography gear was a directional microphone, capable of picking up conversations from 300 yards away. A camera with a telephoto lens that could capture license plates from half a mile, and a sophisticated recording device that automatically uploaded everything to encrypted servers in Langley. But perhaps most importantly, it contained her credentials, a document that could either save her life or destroy her cover, depending on who saw it first. Sarah had been tracking Marcus Webb, a former military contractor with known ties to domestic extremist groups, since January. Webb had moved to Cedar Falls 6 months ago, claiming to be a consultant for environmental cleanup projects. But the CIA had intercepted communication suggesting he was actually coordinating with a network of individuals planning to introduce a biological agent into the Columbia River water treatment facility. The attack was scheduled for the following week, during the annual Salmon Festival, when security would be focused on crowd control rather than perimeter defense. This morning, Webb was finally meeting his contact, a woman named Jennifer Liu, who worked as a maintenance supervisor at the water treatment plant. Sarah had been photographing their carefully orchestrated encounters for weeks, building a case that would not only prevent the attack, but dismantle the entire network. Through her directional microphone, she had already recorded Webb discussing the timing of the operation, the specific entry points they planned to use, and most critically, the type of biological agent they intended to deploy. The meeting was taking place at the old fishing pier, about 200 yards from Sarah's position. Webb had arrived first, carrying what appeared to be a tackle box, but was actually a container for the payment Liu would receive for her cooperation. Liu had approached from the parking area, walking with the casual confidence of someone who belonged there. To any observer, They looked like two acquaintances who had bumped into each other during their morning routines. But Sarah's trained. I caught the subtle signs of a prearranged meeting. The way they positioned themselves to avoid being photographed together. The brief exchange of objects disguised as a handshake. Her camera clicked softly as she captured the crucial moment when Lou handed Webb what appeared to be a key card, undoubtedly providing access to restricted areas of the treatment facility. This was the evidence that would tie Lou directly to the conspiracy and prove that the attack had moved from planning to execution phase. Sarah's pulse remained steady despite the significance of what she was witnessing. Years of fieldwork had taught her that the most important moments often appeared mundane to outsiders. The Columbia River stretched out before her, its surface broken by the occasional jump of a salmon making its way upstream. Sarah had grown to appreciate the genuine beauty of this place, even as she worked to protect it from those who would turn it into a weapon. Her binoculars remained trained on the pier as Webb and Lou concluded their business and began to separate. In approximately 3 minutes, Webb would walk past her bench on his way back to the parking area. She would photograph him one final time, capturing his face clearly for identification purposes, and then begin the process of coordinating with local law enforcement to make the arrests. But as Sarah lowered her binoculars and reached for her camera, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. 2 Cedar Falls police officers were walking directly toward her bench, their body language suggesting this wasn't a casual patrol. Officer Jake Martinez, whom she recognized from her research into local law enforcement, was leading the approach. His partner, a younger man she didn't immediately recognize, had his hand resting near his service weapon. Their eyes were fixed on her with the kind of focused attention that meant someone had called in a complaint. Sarah's mind raced through the possibilities. Had her cover been blown? Was this connected to the operation she was documenting? Or was this simply bad timing, a routine check that would complicate everything she had worked for? She forced herself to remain calm, maintaining the relaxed posture of someone enjoying a peaceful morning in the park. Her messenger bag contained everything she needed to prove her identity and authority, but revealing her true purpose would immediately compromise months of careful surveillance and potentially allow Webb's network to disappear before they could be apprehended. The officers were close enough now that she could see the determination in Martinez's eyes. Something had definitely triggered their attention, and they were approaching her as a suspect rather than a witness or bystander. Sarah's training kicked in as she began to assess her options. She could attempt to complete her documentation of Webb's departure and hope the officers would accept her cover story. She could reveal her identity immediately and risk blowing the entire operation. Or she could try to buy time, maintaining her cover while the officers conducted whatever investigation had brought them to her bench. Webb was now walking along the path that would take him directly past her position. In less than 90 seconds, he would be within perfect range for the photographs that would complete her evidence file. But the officers were also closing in, and their approach suggested they intended to detain her rather than simply ask questions. Sarah made a calculated decision that would define everything that followed. She would maintain her cover as long as possible, document Webb's departure, and then deal with whatever had attracted police attention. It was a risk, but the potential consequences of letting Webb escape with his evidence and connections intact were too great to ignore. The morning air carried the scent of Douglas fir and river water as the 3 trajectories of motion converged on bench 47. Webb approaching from the east along the jogging path, completely unaware that his every movement was being documented. The officers approaching from the west, their equipment jangling softly with each step. And Sarah, perfectly positioned between them, about to become the center of a confrontation that would test everything she had learned about maintaining cover under pressure. She adjusted her grip on the camera and prepared to take the photographs. That would either complete her mission or become the last official act of her career. Officer Jake Martinez had been patrolling Cedar Falls for 15 years, and he prided himself on knowing when something didn't belong. This morning, Mrs. Henderson from Birch Street had called to report a suspicious woman who had been sitting in the same spot every day for weeks, always with cameras and binoculars, always watching. In a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business, a stranger with surveillance equipment was cause for concern. Martinez had initially dismissed the report as the paranoia of an elderly woman with too much time on her hands, but when the calls started coming from other residents, he decided to investigate. His partner, Officer Kevin Brooks, was newer to the force but eager to prove himself. At 26, Brooks had joined the Cedar Falls Police Department straight from the academy, drawn by the promise of community policing and the slower pace of small-town law enforcement. But lately, he had been frustrated by what he saw as the complacency of his older colleagues, their willingness to overlook suspicious behavior in favor of maintaining the peace. This morning's call about the mysterious woman with cameras had given him an opportunity to show that proper police work meant following up on every lead, no matter how minor it might seem. As they approached the bench where Sarah sat, Martinez noticed several things that reinforced his decision to investigate. The woman's equipment looked expensive, far more sophisticated than what a casual birdwatcher would typically own. Her positioning gave her a clear view of multiple areas of the park, including the marina where boats arrived and departed throughout the day. Most importantly, she seemed too comfortable, too settled for someone who was simply enjoying the morning. Scenery. Everything about her suggested someone who was there for a specific purpose, and that purpose involved watching other people. Brooks had already formed his own conclusions about what they were dealing with. In his mind, the woman was most likely conducting surveillance for a private investigation firm, possibly gathering evidence for a divorce case or insurance fraud investigation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Such activities weren't necessarily illegal, but they required proper licensing and notification to local law enforcement. The fact that no one had contacted the department about authorized surveillance operations in the area suggested this woman was operating without proper credentials. It was exactly the kind of violation that established precedent for proper police work. The morning joggers continued their routines around them, oblivious to the developing situation. A man in his 50s passed between the officers and the bench, nodding politely to all three of them as he continued toward the marina. Martinez barely noticed him, his attention focused entirely on the woman who had attracted so much neighborhood concern. She appeared calm, almost unnaturally composed for someone who was about to be questioned by police. In Martinez's experience, innocent people usually showed some sign of nervousness when approached by law enforcement, even if they had done nothing wrong. Sarah watched Webb pass her bench through her peripheral vision, noting the confident stride of someone who believed his mission was proceeding according to plan. She couldn't risk lifting her camera while the officers were watching, but she had already memorized enough details to provide a positive identification later. Webb's facial features, his height and build, the distinctive scar on his left hand, from what appeared to be an old burn injury. The tackle box he carried had a small dent on one corner and scratches that suggested regular use as camouflage for his actual activities. Even without the final photographs, she had enough evidence to ensure Webb's capture once the operation moved to its conclusion. Martinez spoke first, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone accustomed to immediate compliance. He addressed Sarah with the kind of formal politeness that barely concealed suspicion, asking for identification and an explanation of her activities. His tone suggested he had already decided she was guilty of something, and was simply going through the motions of giving her an opportunity to explain herself. Brooks positioned himself slightly to one side, creating a subtle but unmistakable barrier between Sarah and any potential escape route. Sarah responded with the carefully prepared story she had been perfecting for months. She was Rebecca Walsh, a freelance photographer specializing in Pacific Northwest wildlife. She had been commissioned by a Seattle nature magazine to document the seasonal bird migration, patterns along the Columbia River. Her morning routine of observing from the same location was essential for tracking the behavior of specific species over time. She spoke with the enthusiasm of someone genuinely passionate about her work, describing the different types of waterfowl she had been photographing and the optimal lighting conditions for capturing their natural behaviors. But Martinez wasn't buying it. Something about her story felt rehearsed, too perfect in its details. Real bird watchers tended to ramble about their hobby, getting lost in technical discussions about species and migration patterns. This woman's explanation was concise, professional, and carefully limited to exactly the information needed to justify her presence. Her equipment, while consistent with her claimed profession, was far more expensive than what most freelance photographers could afford. Everything about her suggested someone with training and resources that extended far beyond nature photography. Brooks decided to push harder, questioning the specifics of her magazine commission and requesting to see examples of her work. Sarah produced a tablet containing dozens of legitimate wildlife photographs she had taken during her months in Cedar Falls, images that genuinely captured the area's natural beauty and would satisfy any casual inspection. But Brooks noted that many of the photos included background details of the marina, the parking areas, and the walking paths, exactly the kind of information someone conducting surveillance would want to document. The conversation continued for several minutes, with Sarah maintaining her cover story while the officers grew increasingly suspicious. Other park visitors began to notice the interaction, some slowing their morning routines to observe what appeared to be a routine police investigation. A few people recognized Martinez and Brooks, longtime residents who trusted their judgment about potential threats to community safety. The gathering attention added pressure to resolve the situation quickly, before it became a public spectacle that could reflect poorly on the department's handling of security concerns. Martinez made the decision that would change everything. Despite Sarah's calm explanations and supporting documentation, he wasn't satisfied with her story. Something about the situation felt wrong, and his instincts told him this woman represented a threat he couldn't yet identify. He informed her that she would need to accompany them to the station for further questioning, a standard procedure for investigating potential surveillance activities in sensitive areas. It was a reasonable escalation given the circumstances, but it would force Sarah to make the choice she had been hoping to avoid. Sarah's real mission in Cedar Falls stretched back to a classified briefing room in Langley, Virginia, where she had first learned about the threat that would consume the next 4 months of her life. The intelligence had come from multiple sources, each piece of the puzzle revealing a coordinated domestic terrorism plot unlike anything the agency had seen in recent years. Marcus Webb wasn't just a disgruntled former contractor seeking revenge. He was the operational leader of a network that called itself the New Dawn Coalition, a group that believed the federal government had become irredeemably corrupt and needed to be forced into collapse through strategic infrastructure attacks. The Columbia River Water Treatment Facility served nearly 500,000 people across 3 counties. Intelligence analysts had determined that introducing the specific biological agent Webb's network had acquired could potentially kill thousands within the first week and render the entire water system unusable for months. The economic impact alone would devastate the regional economy, but the psychological effect of a successful attack on such a fundamental necessity would create the kind of widespread panic the coalition sought to exploit. This wasn't terrorism for its own sake, but rather the opening move in what they believed would be a broader uprising against federal authority. Sarah had volunteered for the assignment, knowing it would require extended deep cover work in a small Community where outsiders were immediately noticed and remembered. Her background made her uniquely qualified for the role. She had grown up in rural Washington state, understanding the rhythms and social dynamics of Pacific Northwest towns. Her graduate degree in environmental science provided legitimate expertise for her cover identity as a nature photographer. Most importantly, her previous operations had demonstrated an unusual ability to blend into civilian populations, while maintaining the operational awareness necessary for complex surveillance work. The planning phase had taken 6 weeks. Every aspect of Rebecca Walsh's identity had to be meticulously crafted and supported with genuine documentation. Sarah had actually taken freelance photography assignments, building a portfolio that would satisfy professional scrutiny. She had established social media accounts dating back years, creating a digital history that supported her cover story. The apartment on Maple Street had been rented through intermediaries who believed they were helping a legitimate photographer relocate for work opportunities. Even her hiking club membership and community garden volunteering were genuine activities. That allowed her to integrate naturally into local social networks. The surveillance phase had been methodical and patient. Webb's network operated with sophisticated operational security, using dead drops, coded communications, and carefully planned meetings to avoid detection. Sarah had spent weeks learning their patterns, identifying their meeting locations, and mapping their communication methods. The breakthrough had come when she identified Jennifer Liu as Webb's primary asset inside the water treatment facility. Liu's financial troubles had made her vulnerable to recruitment, and the coalition had been exploiting her access to security protocols and maintenance schedules for months. Sarah's equipment bag contained evidence that would dismantle the entire network once the operation concluded. Encrypted hard drives held thousands of hours of surveillance footage and audio recordings. Digital copies of communications, intercepted through various technical means, provided a complete picture of the coalition's structure and timeline. Financial records traced the flow of money from extremist donors to operational expenses, revealing connections that stretched across multiple states. But perhaps most importantly, her documentation proved that the planned attack was imminent, scheduled to coincide with the Salmon Festival when emergency response resources would be stretched thin and public attention focused elsewhere. Morning's meeting between Webb and Liu had been the final piece of operational intelligence Sarah needed. Liu's transfer of the access key confirmed that the coalition had moved from planning to active preparation for the attack. Within hours, Sarah would have contacted her handler to initiate the takedown phase, coordinating with FBI counterterrorism units and local law enforcement to simultaneously arrest all known network members. The timing was critical because the coalition had demonstrated awareness of law enforcement capabilities and would likely accelerate their timeline if they detected any threat to their operational security. But now, standing in Riverside Park with officers Martinez and Brooks closing in, Sarah faced a dilemma that threatened to unravel months of careful work. Revealing her identity would immediately compromise her mission and alert Webb's network that they were under surveillance. The coalition had contingency plans for exactly this scenario, including the ability to activate sleeper cells in other regions if their primary operation was exposed. But refusing to cooperate with local police would likely result in her arrest, potentially keeping her in custody long enough for the coalition to complete their attack. Sarah made a calculated decision based on her assessment of the immediate situation. Martinez and Brooks appeared to be responding to citizen complaints rather than acting on specific intelligence about her activities. Their body language suggested suspicion rather than certainty, indicating they were conducting a preliminary investigation rather than executing a planned arrest. If she could satisfy their concerns without revealing operational details, she might be able to maintain her cover long enough to complete the mission. The risk was significant, but the alternative of allowing a terrorist attack to proceed was unacceptable. Her cover story as Rebecca Walsh had been designed to withstand exactly this kind of scrutiny. The documentation supporting her identity was authentic, created through official channels that would satisfy law enforcement databases. Her photographer credentials were genuine, supported by actual published work and professional references. Most importantly, her behavior and knowledge base were consistent with someone who had legitimately spent months documenting wildlife in the area. She could discuss local bird species, migration patterns, and seasonal changes with the expertise of someone who had actually observed them extensively. The challenge lay in explaining her sophisticated equipment and consistent presence, without revealing the true purpose of her surveillance. Professional photographers did use expensive cameras and telephoto lenses, but the level of equipment in her possession suggested resources beyond what most freelancers could afford. Her daily routine of occupying the same observation position was consistent with serious wildlife documentation, but it also matched the pattern of someone conducting surveillance on human targets. Martinez and Brooks had enough legitimate reasons to be suspicious without understanding the full scope of what they were investigating. Sarah's training had prepared her for interrogation by hostile intelligence services, but dealing with well-intentioned local police presented different challenges. She couldn't rely on constitutional protections to shield classified information, nor could she use the kind of evasive techniques that would be appropriate when dealing with foreign agents. Martinez and Brooks were Americans doing their jobs, protecting their community from what they perceived as a potential threat. Her response had to balance respect for their authority with protection of national security interests that they couldn't be allowed to understand. The conversation took on a more formal tone as Martinez informed Sarah that her explanation raised additional questions requiring further investigation. Brooks positioned himself to prevent any attempt at departure, while Martinez continued asking about her credentials, her employer, and the specific nature of her photography assignment. Their questions were reasonable and professional, exactly the kind of inquiry that responsible law enforcement officers should conduct when investigating suspicious activity in their jurisdiction. But each question required Sarah to provide information. That brought her closer to either blowing her cover or creating inconsistencies that would justify her detention. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on Sarah as she found herself being investigated by the very government she was working to protect. Her mission was designed to prevent an attack that would devastate the community these officers served, but her methods required secrecy that made her appear threatening to those she was trying to help. The constraints of operational security meant she couldn't explain her true purpose, even though doing so would immediately resolve the confrontation and allow her to complete her mission. Instead, she had to maintain a deception that made her appear suspicious while protecting information that could save thousands of lives. Martinez's experience told him that Sarah's story contained enough truth to be plausible, but enough inconsistencies to warrant deeper investigation. Her equipment was professional quality, her knowledge of local wildlife was extensive, and her documentation appeared authentic. But her presence in the area coincided with recent security concerns about the water treatment facility, and her observation position provided excellent surveillance coverage of critical infrastructure. The timing could be coincidental, but Martinez hadn't survived 15 years of police work by ignoring potential connections between suspicious activities and security threats. Brooks was more direct in his suspicions, questioning why a nature photographer would need the kind of long-range camera equipment Sarah possessed, and why her assignment required such extensive observation of areas that included sensitive facilities. His questions reflected genuine security awareness rather than harassment, and his concerns about potential surveillance of critical infrastructure were exactly the kind of vigilance that good police work required. But his persistence was pushing the conversation toward a confrontation that could force Sarah to choose between maintaining her cover and protecting her mission. The morning park activities continued around them as the interrogation intensified. Joggers passed by with curious glances. Dog walkers slowed their pace to observe the interaction, and early commuters taking shortcuts through the park began to notice the official nature of the conversation. The growing attention added pressure to resolve the situation quickly, but it also created witnesses who would remember how the encounter was handled. Martinez was conscious of maintaining professional standards, while Brooks focused on extracting information that would either confirm or dispel their suspicions about Sarah's activities. Sarah recognized that the conversation had reached a tipping point where continued evasion would only increase suspicion and potentially lead to her detention. Her cover story had been tested and held up under initial scrutiny, but deeper investigation would eventually reveal inconsistencies that could compromise her mission. She needed to provide Martinez and Brooks with enough satisfaction to end their inquiry while maintaining the operational security necessary to complete her surveillance of Webb's network. The decision she made in the next few moments would determine whether months of careful intelligence work would culminate in preventing a terrorist attack, or whether operational exposure would allow the coalition to escape and potentially strike elsewhere. The weight of her real credentials pressed against her consciousness as she maintained the facade of Rebecca Walsh, freelance photographer. In her messenger bag, mere inches from where Martinez stood, lay documentation that would instantly transform this confrontation from suspicious person investigation to federal security briefing. Her CIA identification would immediately establish her authority and legitimate purpose, but revealing it would also signal to anyone watching that the intelligence community was actively operating in Cedar Falls. Webb's network had demonstrated sophisticated awareness of law enforcement patterns, and the sudden appearance of federal agents would likely trigger their contingency protocols for evading capture. Sarah's mental calculations weighed the probability of maintaining her cover against the consequences of exposure. Martinez and Brooks appeared to be operating on citizen complaints rather than specific intelligence, suggesting their investigation was reactive rather than planned. If she could satisfy their immediate concerns about her activities without revealing classified information, there was still a possibility of completing her mission before the coalition realized they were under surveillance. But if their suspicions had been triggered by broader security awareness about the water treatment facility, her presence might already be connected to intelligence activities that would compromise her effectiveness, regardless of how she handled the current confrontation. The morning sun had begun to burn off the river fog, revealing the full scope of the park and marina where Sarah had been conducting her surveillance. From her position on bench 47, she could see the exact spot where Webb and Lou had concluded their meeting, the evidence of their conspiracy now documented in her equipment, but not yet transmitted to her handlers. The irony was stark. She was being detained for activities designed to protect the very community represented by the officers questioning her, but the operational requirements of her mission prevented her from explaining the true nature of her work. Martinez made his decision based on the totality of the circumstances. Sarah's story was plausible but not completely convincing. Her equipment was sophisticated beyond normal recreational use, and her presence in the area coincided with heightened security concerns. Professional responsibility required him to investigate further, even if that meant potentially inconveniencing an innocent photographer. He informed Sarah that she would need to accompany them to the station for additional questioning, a standard procedure that would allow for more thorough verification of her credentials and activities. The moment hung suspended between law enforcement duty and national security necessity. Sarah faced the choice between submitting to detention that would prevent her from completing her mission or revealing her identity in a way that would compromise months of intelligence work. Around them, the normal rhythms of Cedar Falls morning life continued, unaware that the prevention of a terrorist attack hung in the balance of this seemingly routine police investigation. The next words spoken would determine whether Marcus Webb's coalition would face justice or escape to strike another day, whether thousands of lives would be protected or endangered, and whether Sarah's deep cover mission would end in success or failure. Brooks stepped forward to assist with what appeared to be a routine escort to the patrol vehicle, his hand moving instinctively toward the restraint equipment on his duty belt. The professional courtesies were maintained, but the underlying message was clear. Sarah's cooperation was no longer optional, and her explanation had not satisfied their concerns about her activities. Martinez began the standard phrases about voluntary questioning and the opportunity to clarify any misunderstandings, but his tone indicated that the investigation had moved beyond the preliminary stage into formal law enforcement action. Sarah's training had prepared her for this moment, but the specific circumstances created unique challenges that standard operational protocols didn't address. She was an American intelligence officer being detained by American law enforcement while working to protect American lives from American terrorists. The constitutional protections that might apply to foreign agents or criminal suspects were complicated by her official status and the classified nature of her mission. Her handler was expecting regular contact, and her failure to report could trigger emergency protocols that would expose the entire operation even more dramatically than direct revelation of her identity. The decision crystallized as Martinez gestured toward the patrol vehicle parked near the marina entrance. Sarah could continue maintaining her cover, accept detention, and hope that her agency could extract her before Webb's network realized their security had been compromised. She could reveal her identity immediately, trusting that Martinez and Brooks would understand the implications and maintain operational security. Or she could attempt to delay the situation long enough to transmit her intelligence about Webb's meeting while accepting the consequences of deeper law enforcement scrutiny. Each option carried significant risks and uncertain outcomes. Maintaining her cover while accepting detention would likely prevent her from stopping the planned attack, but it would also preserve the possibility of continued intelligence operations against the coalition's broader network. Revealing her identity would protect her from arrest, but would also signal to any surveillance that federal agencies were actively operating in the area. Attempting to delay while transmitting intelligence would risk both exposure and escalation of the law enforcement response, potentially creating a public incident that would serve the coalition's goals of demonstrating government incompetence. The weight of thousands of potential victims influenced Sarah's calculations as she prepared to respond to Martinez's instructions. The Columbia River Water Treatment Facility served families throughout the region, people who trusted that their government would protect them from threats they couldn't even imagine. Children who would drink contaminated water, elderly residents who would be most vulnerable to biological agents, emergency responders who would face unknown dangers while trying to help others. The human cost of failure was too high to accept, regardless of the operational implications of exposure. But even as Sarah prepared to make her choice, she maintained the composed demeanor that had carried her through months of deep cover work. Her breathing remained steady, her posture relaxed, her expression calm. To Martinez and Brooks, she appeared to be someone accepting the inevitable consequences of suspicious behavior, perhaps a private investigator or corporate spy who had been caught operating without proper authorization. They couldn't see the classified intelligence officer calculating national security implications or the federal agent preparing to reveal information that would transform their routine investigation into something far beyond their normal responsibilities. The morning park sounds continued around them, joggers breathing rhythmically as they passed, water lapping against the marina docks, birds calling from the trees that had provided cover for Sarah's surveillance work. The normalcy of the environment contrasted sharply with the gravity of the decision being made, the peaceful suburban setting masking the life and death implications of what would happen next. In a few moments, the carefully constructed balance between security and secrecy would shift irreversibly, and the consequences would ripple far beyond the immediate confrontation between a federal agent and two local police officers. Sarah looked directly at Martinez as she prepared to respond to his instruction to accompany them to the station. Her next words would either preserve her mission or transform it, either protect her cover or expose her identity, either maintain operational security or sacrifice it for immediate tactical advantage. The choice belonged to her alone, but its consequences would affect thousands of people who would never know how close they had come to experiencing a terrorist attack that could have changed their lives forever. The moment balanced on the edge of revelation, waiting for her decision to tip it toward security or exposure, success or failure, protection or vulnerability. Sarah reached into her messenger bag with deliberate slowness, her movements calculated, to avoid triggering any defensive responses from Martinez or Brooks. The morning air carried the scent of cedar and river water as she withdrew a leather wallet containing her photographer's credentials, business cards, and the various forms of identification that supported her cover identity. Her fingers brushed against the hidden compartment where her real credentials lay concealed, the weight of that choice pressing against her consciousness, even as she maintained the careful facade of Rebecca Walsh, nature photographer. Martinez accepted the wallet with professional courtesy, his weathered hands examining each document with the thoroughness of someone who had seen enough fake identification to recognize the genuine article. Sarah's cover documentation was flawless, created through the same official channels that produced legitimate government identification. Her photographer's license, business registration, and professional references would satisfy any standard law enforcement inquiry. But Martinez was looking for something beyond surface authenticity, some indication that would either confirm or dispel his growing suspicions about her true purpose in Cedar Falls. The business cards were thick stock with embossed lettering, featuring Rebecca Walsh's name alongside contact information for a Seattle-based photography studio that actually existed and would respond appropriately to any inquiries. Martinez noted the quality of the printing, the professional design, and the way the cards showed appropriate wear from handling. These weren't hastily created props, but rather the accumulated documentation of someone who had been working in photography for years. Yet something about their pristine organization suggested preparation rather than natural accumulation through regular business activities. Brooks examined Sarah's camera equipment with the focused attention of someone genuinely interested in understanding its capabilities. The telephoto lens was professional grade, capable of the kind of detailed wildlife photography that would justify extended observation sessions. The camera body showed appropriate wear from field use, and the settings indicated someone familiar with technical photography in challenging lighting conditions. But Brooks also noted that the equipment configuration was ideal for surveillance work, with features that would allow for discrete documentation of human subjects at considerable distances. Sarah answered their questions with the practiced ease of someone who had lived her cover identity for months. She discussed the technical challenges of photographing migratory birds, the optimal times for capturing specific behaviors, and the way seasonal changes affected both wildlife patterns and photographic opportunities. Her knowledge was genuine, acquired through actual field experience that had served as both cover for her surveillance work and legitimate preparation for maintaining her fictional identity. Every detail of her explanation was accurate and verifiable, making her story compelling even to skeptical law enforcement officers. But Martinez remained unconvinced by what he was hearing. Sarah's responses were too polished, too comprehensive for casual questioning. Professional photographers tended to become passionate when discussing their work, often providing more information than requested and wandering into technical discussions that revealed genuine enthusiasm for their craft. Sarah's answers were informative and accurate, but they felt rehearsed, as if she had prepared for exactly this type of interrogation. Her composure under questioning was also unusual. Most innocent civilians showed some nervousness when confronted by police, even when they had done nothing wrong. The documentation Sarah provided included examples of her published work, magazine articles featuring her photography alongside her professional biography. Martinez recognized some of the publications, regional magazines that covered Pacific Northwest outdoor activities and environmental issues. The articles were legitimate, available through normal subscription channels, and featured photography that demonstrated genuine technical skill. But he also noticed that many of the featured locations were near sensitive infrastructure, power plants, water treatment facilities, and transportation hubs that would be natural targets for surveillance operations. Brooks was more direct in his questioning, asking Sarah to explain why her photography assignment required such extensive observation of areas that included the water treatment facility visible in the background of several images. His tone remained professional, but his questions reflected genuine security concerns rather than casual curiosity. The facility had been the subject of recent security briefings, and any unusual activity in the surrounding area was supposed to be investigated thoroughly. Sarah's presence, while potentially innocent, fell into the category of situations that required careful evaluation. Sarah's response demonstrated both her professional training and the months of preparation that had gone into creating her cover. Identity. She explained that environmental photography often required documentation of the relationship between natural habitats and human infrastructure, showing how development affected wildlife behavior and migration patterns. The water treatment facility was relevant to her assignment because it represented the kind of human presence that influenced bird populations, and capturing both elements in the same frame helped tell a complete environmental story. Her explanation was scientifically accurate and artistically valid, the kind of approach that legitimate nature photographers regularly employed in their work. But Martinez noted that it also provided perfect justification for the kind of systematic observation that surveillance operations required. Someone conducting reconnaissance on the water treatment facility could use identical reasoning to explain their presence and activities. The fact that Sarah's explanation was so perfectly suited to both legitimate photography and potential surveillance made it impossible to verify through questioning alone. The conversation continued for nearly 20 minutes, with Martinez and Brooks asking increasingly detailed questions about Sarah's background, her current assignment, and her daily routines in Cedar Falls. Sarah provided consistent answers that supported her cover story, but she also began to recognize that the officers' suspicions were not diminishing despite her careful responses. Their body language suggested they had moved beyond preliminary inquiry into formal investigation, and their questions were becoming more focused on identifying inconsistencies rather than understanding her activities. Brooks asked about Sarah's living arrangements in Cedar Falls, her contacts in the local community, and her familiarity with other areas beyond the park where they were currently standing. His questions revealed that the police had received multiple reports about her activities, not just from the park but from other locations where she had been seen conducting surveillance as part of her mission. The scope of the citizen complaints suggested that her operational security had been less effective than she had believed, and that her cover identity was under broader scrutiny than this single encounter indicated. Sarah realized that maintaining her cover story was becoming increasingly difficult as the officers' questions revealed the extent of local awareness about her activities. Her careful integration into the community had been designed to make her presence unremarkable, but the nature of her surveillance work had apparently attracted attention despite her precautions. The challenge was that explaining her behavior required either revealing classified information or creating additional deceptions that would be vulnerable to further investigation. Martinez made the decision that would force the confrontation to its next level. Despite Sarah's thorough documentation and consistent explanations, he remained convinced that her activities warranted further investigation. Her story was plausible but not convincing. Her equipment was sophisticated beyond normal recreational needs, and her presence in the area coincided with specific security concerns about the water treatment facility. Professional responsibility required him to investigate more thoroughly, even if that meant detaining someone who might ultimately prove to be innocent. The formal language of police procedure entered the conversation as Martinez informed Sarah that her explanations had not fully addressed their concerns about her activities. Brooks positioned himself to assist with what was clearly becoming an arrest situation, his hand moving to the restraint equipment on his duty belt. The professional courtesies remained in place, but the underlying message was unmistakable. Sarah's cooperation was no longer optional, and her documentation had not satisfied their investigation. Sarah faced the moment she had been dreading since the officers first approached her bench. Continuing to maintain her cover would mean accepting arrest and detention, potentially preventing her from stopping Webb's planned attack on the water supply. But revealing her true identity would expose months of careful intelligence work and potentially compromise the broader investigation into the New Dawn Coalition's activities. Either choice carried significant risks, both to her mission and to the lives of the people she was working to protect. The morning park activities continued around them, joggers maintaining their routines while dogwalkers and early commuters began to notice the increasingly official nature of the conversation taking place near Bench 47. The growing attention created additional pressure to resolve the situation quickly, but it also meant that any revelation of Sarah's true identity would likely become public knowledge within hours. The operational security that had protected her mission for months was about to be tested in the most direct way possible. Martinez began the standard arrest procedures, informing Sarah of her rights while Brooks prepared to escort her to their patrol vehicle. The words were familiar from countless police encounters, but the context was unlike anything Sarah had experienced in her intelligence career. She was being arrested by American law enforcement officers while working to protect American lives from American terrorists, a situation that her training had not specifically prepared her to handle. The constitutional protections being read to her were designed for criminal suspects, not federal agents conducting classified operations. Sarah's training emphasized the importance of maintaining operational security even under extreme pressure, but it also stressed the necessity of protecting innocent lives when operational concerns conflicted with immediate threats. The planned attack on the water treatment facility would affect thousands of people who had no idea they were in danger. Families and children who trusted that their government would protect them from threats they couldn't imagine. The weight of that responsibility influenced her calculations as she prepared to respond to Martinez's instructions. The decision crystallized as Brooks moved to assist with the arrest procedures. Sarah could submit to detention and hope that her agency could extract her before Webb's network realized their security had been compromised. But that approach risked allowing the planned attack to proceed while she was held in custody. She could reveal her identity immediately, trusting that Martinez and Brooks would understand the implications and maintain operational security. But that choice would expose her mission and potentially alert the terrorists to flee before they could be captured. Sarah's hand moved slowly toward her messenger bag, her movements careful and deliberate to avoid triggering any defensive responses from the officers. Martinez watched closely as she reached into a concealed compartment, expecting to see additional documentation supporting her photographer cover story. But what Sarah withdrew would transform their understanding of the situation and shift the encounter from routine law enforcement to national security emergency. The morning sun reflected off the leather surface of a credential wallet that looked different from the photographer documentation she had provided earlier. This wallet was heavier, more substantial, with the kind of official appearance that suggested government rather than commercial origin. Martinez recognized the look immediately, having encountered federal credentials during previous investigations involving agencies beyond local jurisdiction. His expression shifted from suspicion to uncertainty as Sarah opened the wallet to reveal identification that would change everything about their interaction. Brooks noticed the change in his partner's demeanor and moved closer to observe what Sarah was showing them. The credential wallet contained identification that was clearly official, with security features and formatting that indicated federal law enforcement or intelligence authorization. But the specific agency and Sarah's actual rank were not immediately clear, requiring closer examination to understand the full implications of what they were seeing. The morning had transformed from routine patrol to something far beyond their normal responsibilities. Sarah maintained her composed demeanor as she allowed the officers to examine her real credentials, knowing that this moment would either resolve the immediate confrontation or create new complications that could compromise her mission in different ways. Her CIA identification established her authority and legitimate purpose, but it also signaled to anyone observing that federal intelligence operations were active in Cedar Falls. The operational security she had maintained for months was about to be sacrificed for the tactical advantage of avoiding arrest. Martinez studied the credentials with the careful attention of someone who understood the significance of what he was seeing but needed time to process the implications. The identification was clearly authentic, with security features that would be impossible to counterfeit and formatting that matched his previous encounters with federal documentation. But the presence of a CIA officer conducting surveillance in his jurisdiction raised questions about coordination with local law enforcement and the scope of whatever operation was taking place. Brooks was less familiar with federal credentials, but recognized the immediate change in the dynamic of their encounter. The woman they had approached as a suspicious person conducting unauthorized surveillance was revealed to be a federal agent, operating under official authority. The implications were significant for both their investigation and their potential liability for interfering with a federal operation. His training emphasized the importance of cooperation with federal agencies, but it also stressed the need to verify credentials and understand jurisdictional boundaries. Sarah spoke quietly as the officers examined her identification, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to briefing law enforcement personnel on security matters. She explained that she was conducting a classified counterterrorism operation involving threats to critical infrastructure in the Cedar Falls area. Her surveillance activities were authorized at the highest levels of government, and her photographer cover was necessary operational security to prevent the subjects of investigation from realizing they were under observation. The weight of national security responsibility settled over Martinez and Brooks as they began to understand the true nature of what they had encountered. Their investigation of suspicious activity had inadvertently intersected with a federal counterterrorism operation, creating complications that extended far beyond their normal law enforcement responsibilities. The woman they had been preparing to arrest was actually working to prevent exactly the kind of threat that their security concerns had been designed to detect. Martinez was the first to speak, his voice reflecting both respect for Sarah's authority and concern about the implications of their encounter. He asked about coordination with local law enforcement, expressing frustration that his department had not been informed about federal operations in their jurisdiction. His questions were professional and legitimate, reflecting the kind of interagency cooperation that effective law enforcement required. But they also revealed his understanding that the situation had moved far beyond routine patrol into areas requiring careful handling. Sarah's response balanced operational security requirements with the need to maintain positive relationships with local law enforcement. She explained that her operation involved ongoing surveillance of individuals who had demonstrated sophisticated awareness of law enforcement activities, making broad coordination impossible without compromising the investigation. Her cover identity and surveillance methods were specifically designed to avoid the kind of official attention that would alert the subjects to federal interest in their activities. Brooks asked about the immediate threat level and whether the Cedar Falls Police Department should be implementing special security measures or emergency protocols. His question reflected genuine concern for public safety rather than curiosity. About classified operations, Sarah's answer would need to provide enough information to ensure appropriate law enforcement response without revealing specific operational details that could compromise her mission if they became public knowledge. The morning conversation had transformed from suspicious person investigation to federal security briefing, with Martinez and Brooks suddenly responsible for information that could affect thousands of lives. Their training had prepared them for cooperation with federal agencies, but the specific circumstances of Sarah's operation created unique challenges for maintaining both operational security and public safety. The decisions made in the next few minutes would determine whether months of intelligence work would culminate in preventing a terrorist attack, or whether operational exposure would force the investigation into a new and more dangerous phase. The silence that followed Sarah's revelation stretched across Riverside Park like morning mist, heavy with implications that would reshape everything Martinez and Brooks thought they understood about their routine patrol. Sarah's CIA credentials lay open in Martinez's weathered hands, the official seal and security features unmistakably authentic under the growing daylight. The weight of federal authority pressed against the small-town rhythms of Cedar Falls, transforming a suspicious person investigation into something that would require resources and protocols far beyond anything the local police department had ever handled. Martinez was the first to find his voice, though the words came slowly as he processed the magnitude of what Sarah had revealed. His 15 years of law enforcement experience had included occasional interactions with federal agencies, but never under circumstances where a classified counterterrorism operation was unfolding in his jurisdiction without his knowledge. The professional respect he maintained for federal authority conflicted with his frustration at being left uninformed about threats to the community he had sworn to protect. His questions came carefully, reflecting both his desire to understand the situation and his awareness that he was now dealing with information that could affect national security. Brooks stood frozen beside his partner, his hand still positioned near his duty belt where moments earlier he had been preparing restraint equipment for what he believed would be a routine arrest. The transformation of their suspect into a federal agent conducting classified operations challenged everything he thought he understood about law enforcement hierarchy and jurisdictional boundaries. His academy training had covered cooperation with federal agencies in theoretical terms, but the reality of discovering an active CIA operation through citizen complaints about suspicious photography was unlike anything his instructors had prepared him to handle. Sarah watched both officers carefully as they absorbed the implications of her revelation, knowing that their next actions would determine whether months of intelligence work could still achieve its intended purpose. The morning sun had burned away most of the river fog, revealing the full scope of the park where she had been conducting surveillance on Marcus Webb's terrorist network. In the distance, she could see the water treatment facility that remained the primary target of the planned attack, its security perimeter visible but inadequate to prevent the kind of infiltration that Webb's coalition had been planning. The irony was not lost on her that revealing her identity to prevent arrest might ultimately make it impossible to prevent the very attack she had been working to stop. Martinez closed Sarah's credential wallet with deliberate care and handed it back to her, his movements reflecting the kind of respect that federal authority commanded even when its presence created complications for local law enforcement. His voice carried both professional courtesy and underlying tension as he asked about the specific nature of the threat that had brought CIA operations to Cedar Falls. The question was legitimate and necessary for public safety planning, but Sarah's answer would need to balance operational security requirements with the officers' need to understand their responsibilities in the developing situation. Sarah's response was measured and precise, providing enough information to justify her presence and authority, without revealing operational details that could compromise the investigation if they became public knowledge. She explained that intelligence had identified credible threats against critical infrastructure in the Cedar Falls area, requiring surveillance operations to identify the individuals involved and prevent potential attacks. Her photographer cover had been necessary to conduct extended observation without alerting the subjects that they were under federal investigation. The specifics of the threat and the identity of the targets remained classified, but she could confirm that the situation involved domestic terrorism with potentially catastrophic consequences for the regional population. The weight of that information settled over Martinez and Brooks like a physical presence, transforming their understanding of the morning's events from routine patrol to crisis response. Martinez immediately began calculating the implications for his department's responsibilities, wondering whether emergency protocols should be activated and whether additional resources needed to be mobilized. His training emphasized the importance of interagency cooperation during security threats, but it also stressed the need to avoid actions that could compromise ongoing operations or create public panic without justification. Brooks was struggling with the practical implications of what Sarah had revealed, particularly the realization that his department had been investigating the very person working to protect their community from attack. His questions reflected genuine confusion about how such situations were supposed to be handled, and whether their interaction with Sarah had already compromised her mission in ways that could affect public safety. The possibility that their well-intentioned investigation might have inadvertently aided terrorists by exposing federal surveillance was deeply troubling to someone who had joined law enforcement to protect innocent people. Sarah recognized the officers' confusion and concern, understanding that their cooperation would be essential for maintaining what remained of her operational security. She explained that their investigation had been based on legitimate citizen complaints and reasonable law enforcement procedures, and that their professional handling of the situation had actually helped maintain her cover by demonstrating that local police were responsive to security concerns. The key now was ensuring that her revealed identity remained confidential while allowing her to complete the intelligence collection necessary to prevent the planned attack. Martinez asked about coordination with his department moving forward, expressing both his willingness to provide support and his concern about keeping his officers and the community safe during ongoing federal operations. His questions reflected the kind of professional responsibility that good law enforcement required, but they also highlighted the challenges of maintaining operational security while ensuring appropriate local cooperation. Sarah's answers would need to establish clear boundaries and expectations without revealing information that could compromise the mission if it leaked beyond the officers currently involved. The conversation was interrupted by the appearance of additional patrol units responding to Martinez's earlier radio calls for backup support. 2 more Cedar Falls police vehicles approached the park, their arrival drawing attention from morning joggers and dog walkers who had been observing the extended conversation near Bench 47. Sarah watched the approaching officers with growing concern, knowing that each additional person who learned about her true identity increased the risk of operational compromise, while making it more difficult to maintain the secrecy necessary for her mission's success. Sergeant Lisa Thompson emerged from the lead vehicle with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to taking command of complex situations. Her 20-year career with Cedar Falls Police had included extensive training in multi-agency operations and crisis management, making her the natural choice to coordinate the department's response to whatever Martinez and Brooks had discovered during their investigation. But as she approached the group near the bench, Thompson had no way of knowing that she was about to become involved in a federal counterterrorism operation that would test every aspect of her professional training and judgment. Officer David Kim followed Thompson from the second patrol vehicle, his relative inexperience offset by recent academy training that had emphasized homeland security and interagency cooperation in ways that older officers hadn't received. Kim's arrival would prove significant in ways that none of them could anticipate, as his background in military intelligence before joining local law enforcement had given him familiarity with federal credentials and protocols that would soon become crucial for verifying Sarah's identity and authority. Sarah made a rapid assessment of the developing situation as 4 Cedar Falls police officers converged on her position, knowing that she now faced the challenge of managing multiple law enforcement personnel while maintaining whatever operational security remained possible. The arrival of backup units had been triggered by routine procedures, but it also represented a significant escalation in the official attention focused on her activities. Every additional officer who learned about her CIA identity would increase the risk that information would leak to the terrorist network she had been investigating. Thompson approached with the professional bearing that senior law enforcement officers brought to uncertain situations, ready to take command but also prepared to defer to federal authority if the circumstances warranted such cooperation. Her opening questions to Martinez reflected both her desire to understand what had prompted the backup request and her awareness that the extended conversation suggested something more complex than routine suspicious person investigation. The tone of her inquiry indicated someone prepared to handle whatever the situation required, but also someone who expected clear communication about jurisdictional boundaries and operational responsibilities. Martinez briefed Thompson on the essential details of their encounter with Sarah, explaining that what had begun as investigation of citizen complaints about suspicious photography had evolved into contact with a federal agent conducting classified operations in their jurisdiction. His summary was professional and accurate, but it also reflected his own uncertainty about how such situations should be handled and what responsibilities his department now carried for supporting or avoiding interference with ongoing federal investigations. Thompson's response demonstrated the kind of experienced judgment that had made her effective in supervisory roles, asking the right questions to understand both the immediate situation and its broader implications for department operations. Her inquiry about verification of Sarah's credentials reflected appropriate caution rather than distrust, recognizing that proper protocols required confirmation of authority before local resources could be committed to supporting federal operations. The request was reasonable and necessary, but it also created additional opportunities for operational compromise if not handled carefully. Kim stepped forward when Thompson asked about credential verification, his background in military intelligence. Having provided familiarity with the security features and formatting of various federal identification documents, his examination of Sarah's CIA credentials was thorough and professional, confirming their authenticity while also demonstrating the kind of interagency knowledge that would be essential for maintaining proper cooperation during ongoing operations. His verification provided Thompson with the confidence she needed to proceed with appropriate support while maintaining necessary security protocols. Sarah found herself briefing 4 Cedar Falls police officers about aspects of her mission that she had hoped to keep completely classified, but she recognized that their cooperation was now essential for preventing the planned terrorist attack. Her explanation emphasized the time-sensitive nature of the threat while stressing the importance of maintaining operational security to prevent the subjects from realizing they were under surveillance. The balance between information sharing and security protection required careful judgment about what details were necessary for local law enforcement cooperation without compromising the broader investigation. Thompson made the decision that would define her department's role in the developing crisis, authorizing full cooperation with Sarah's mission, while implementing security protocols to protect both the operation and public safety. Her instructions to Martinez, Brooks, and Kim reflected understanding of their responsibilities as local law enforcement officers supporting federal counterterrorism efforts. But they also established clear boundaries about information sharing and operational involvement. The professionalism of her response demonstrated why Cedar Falls residents trusted their police department to handle complex situations with appropriate judgment and competence. The coordination meeting that followed transformed the morning park encounter into an impromptu command briefing, with Sarah providing essential information about the terrorist threat while the Cedar Falls officers contributed local knowledge and resources that would be crucial for preventing the planned attack. The collaboration represented exactly the kind of interagency cooperation that effective counterterrorism required. But it also meant that operational security had been irreversibly compromised in ways that would force significant changes to Sarah's mission approach. Sarah explained that Marcus Webb's New Dawn Coalition was planning to introduce biological agents into the Columbia River water treatment facility during the upcoming Salmon Festival, when security attention would be focused on crowd control rather than perimeter defense. The attack was scheduled for the following week, with Jennifer Liu providing inside access through her position as a maintenance supervisor. The morning's meeting between Webb and Liu had confirmed that the operation had moved from planning to final preparation phase, making immediate law enforcement action necessary to prevent catastrophic consequences for the regional population. Thompson immediately grasped the implications of what Sarah was describing, recognizing that the planned attack would affect not only Cedar Falls, but the entire Columbia River region served by the treatment facility. Her questions about evacuation procedures and emergency response protocols reflected the kind of comprehensive planning that major incidents required. But they also highlighted the challenges of maintaining operational security while preparing for potential mass casualty scenarios. The balance between preparation and secrecy would require careful coordination between federal and local agencies with different capabilities and responsibilities. Martinez asked about the immediate arrest timeline, wanting to understand whether Webb and his conspirators would be taken into custody before they could attempt their planned attack. His concern reflected both professional interest in successful law enforcement outcomes and personal investment in protecting the community where he had served for 15 years. Sarah's answer would need to address both the tactical considerations of arrest timing and the strategic requirements of dismantling the broader terrorist network before it could relocate or activate alternative plans. Brooks was focused on the practical aspects of supporting the federal operation, asking about surveillance protocols and whether local officers would be needed to assist with monitoring Webb's activities during the final phase of the investigation. His questions demonstrated genuine commitment to public safety and willingness to contribute whatever resources his department could provide. But they also reflected the inexperience with federal operations that made clear communication about roles and boundaries essential for effective cooperation. Kim's military intelligence background led him to ask more sophisticated questions about the terrorist network structure and capabilities, inquiring whether the Cedar Falls cell was part of a larger organization with operations in other regions. His understanding of counterterrorism operations helped him grasp the broader implications of Sarah's mission and the potential consequences if the investigation was compromised before all network members could be identified and apprehended. His questions reflected the kind of strategic thinking that would be valuable for comprehensive mission success. Sarah's briefing continued for nearly an hour as she provided the local officers with enough information to understand their role in preventing the planned attack while maintaining necessary security, about aspects of the investigation that remained ongoing. The collaboration represented a significant shift from her original mission parameters, but it also created opportunities for local knowledge and resources that could improve the chances of successful intervention. The challenge now was maintaining operational effectiveness while managing the increased complexity of multi-agency coordination. Thompson concluded the briefing by establishing clear protocols for communication and coordination during the remaining phases of the operation, ensuring that her officers understood both their responsibilities and their limitations in supporting federal counterterrorism efforts. Her instructions reflected understanding of the gravity of the situation while maintaining the professional standards that effective law enforcement required. The morning's events had transformed routine patrol into participation in national security operations, but her department was prepared to meet whatever challenges that responsibility entailed. As the briefing concluded and the additional patrol units prepared to resume their normal duties, Sarah faced the reality that her mission had been fundamentally altered by the morning's events. The operational security she had maintained for months was now shared among multiple local law enforcement officers, creating both opportunities and vulnerabilities that would require careful management. During the critical final phase of preventing Webb's planned attack, the collaboration with Cedar Falls police had been forced by circumstances, but it also represented the kind of interagency cooperation that could make the difference between successful prevention and catastrophic failure. The sun was now fully visible above the Columbia River, burning away the last traces of morning mist and revealing the peaceful community that remained unaware of how close it had come to experiencing devastating terrorist attack. Sarah gathered her equipment and prepared to continue her surveillance operations with the knowledge that local law enforcement was now aware of her mission and committed to supporting its success. The revelation of her identity had created new challenges, but it had also established partnerships that could prove essential for protecting thousands of innocent lives from those who would use their water supply as a weapon of mass destruction. 6 months later, the Columbia River flowed peacefully past the memorial bench that had been installed near the spot where Sarah's surveillance had documented the final planning meeting of the New Dawn Coalition's terrorist network. The inscription simply read, "In recognition of public service," without mentioning the classified operation that had prevented biological contamination of the regional water supply or the interagency cooperation that had made successful intervention possible. Visitors to Riverside Park enjoyed the tranquil setting without knowing that their safety had once depended on a CIA agent disguised as a nature photographer and local police officers who had chosen duty over bureaucracy when faced with threats they couldn't have imagined. Sarah stood beside the memorial on a crisp autumn morning, no longer in disguise but wearing the dress blues of a CIA officer attending a ceremony honoring the Cedar Falls Police Department for their role in preventing domestic terrorism. Martinez, Brooks, Thompson, and Kim had all received federal recognition for their professionalism and courage during the investigation, though the specific details of their contribution remained classified for operational security reasons. Their response to discovering federal operations in their jurisdiction had demonstrated the kind of law enforcement excellence that made interagency cooperation effective during national security crises. The ceremony was brief and understated, reflecting the classified nature of the operation and the ongoing security requirements that prevented public discussion of specific details. But for those who knew what had really happened during those critical days in Cedar Falls, the recognition represented acknowledgement of the ordinary police officers who had made extraordinary contributions to protecting their community and their country. Their willingness to trust federal authority while maintaining their commitment to public safety had exemplified the best aspects of American law enforcement cooperation. Marcus Webb and Jennifer Liu were serving consecutive life sentences in federal prison, along with 7 other members of the New Dawn Coalition who had been arrested during coordinated raids following Sarah's intelligence collection. The biological agents they had planned to use were never deployed, and the water treatment facility had implemented additional security measures that made similar attacks far more difficult to execute. The successful prevention of the planned attack had disrupted the broader domestic terrorism network and prevented what could have been the most devastating attack on civilian infrastructure in decades. But perhaps the most significant outcome of the operation was the recognition that, Effective counterterrorism required seamless cooperation between federal agencies and local law enforcement, with each level contributing unique capabilities and knowledge that enhanced overall security effectiveness. Sarah's mission had succeeded not because of her individual efforts alone, but because Cedar Falls police officers had chosen to support federal authority, even when that support complicated their own responsibilities and created risks they hadn't anticipated. The morning breeze carried the scent of cedar and river water across Riverside Park as Sarah prepared to leave Cedar Falls for her next assignment, knowing that the community would remain safe because ordinary people had made extraordinary choices when faced with circumstances that tested their commitment to protecting others. The terrorist attack that could have poisoned thousands of innocent lives had been prevented not through dramatic action or heroic gestures, but through the quiet professionalism of intelligence officers and police officers who understood that their duty extended beyond their individual responsibilities to encompass their shared obligation to protect the nation they served. The peaceful scene at Riverside Park offered no hint of the life and death decisions that had once been made at Bench 47, where a CIA agent had chosen to trust local law enforcement and police officers had chosen to support federal authority. Despite the personal and professional risks that cooperation entailed, the successful prevention of the New Dawn Coalition's planned attack would remain classified for decades, but its impact would be measured in the thousands of lives that continued because dedicated public servants had fulfilled their oath to protect and defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic, regardless of the personal cost that service required. The morning air hung thick with anticipation as Sarah Chen stood beside Bench 47, watching Officers Martinez and Brooks exchange glances that spoke volumes about their growing certainty that something wasn't right about her story. The fog had lifted completely from the Columbia River, revealing the water treatment facility in stark detail across the parkland, its concrete structures and security fencing a constant reminder of what was truly at stake in this seemingly routine police encounter. Sarah's mind calculated rapidly through her remaining options, each one carrying consequences that could ripple far beyond this quiet park in Cedar Falls, Oregon. Martinez shifted his weight, his hand unconsciously moving toward the radio clipped to his shoulder as he prepared to escalate the situation beyond what could be resolved through conversation alone. His 15 years of experience had taught him to trust his instincts when something felt wrong, and everything about Sarah's presence triggered warnings that he couldn't ignore despite her professional documentation and plausible explanations. The expensive photography equipment, the strategic positioning for surveillance, the two perfect answers to questions that should have prompted more natural responses from an innocent photographer, all combined to paint a picture of someone engaged in activities far more complex than nature photography. Brooks positioned himself with the tactical awareness of someone preparing for arrest procedures, his younger enthusiasm for proper police work overriding any hesitation about detaining someone whose story might ultimately prove legitimate. The academy training that emphasized thorough investigation of suspicious activities had prepared him for exactly this type of encounter, where initial cooperation masked potential threats that required deeper examination. His confidence in the correctness of their approach was reinforced by the multiple citizen complaints that had brought them to investigate Sarah's activities in the first place. Sarah felt the weight of her concealed CIA credentials pressing against her consciousness as she watched the two officers prepare to take actions that would force her to choose between maintaining her cover and preventing a terrorist attack that could kill thousands of innocent people. The months of careful surveillance work, the painstaking documentation of Marcus Webb's network, the intelligence about the planned biological attack on the water treatment facility, all of it balanced on the edge of exposure as she faced the reality that her mission was about to be compromised by the very law enforcement officers whose community she was working to protect. The irony of the situation struck her with painful clarity as Martinez began speaking the formal language of detention, informing her that she would need to accompany them to the station for additional questioning about her activities in the park. She was being arrested for trying to prevent terrorism by American law enforcement officers who were doing their jobs exactly as they should, protecting their community from what appeared to be suspicious surveillance activities. The system was working as designed, but that very efficiency was about to create a catastrophic failure in national security. Martinez completed his explanation of the detention procedures with professional courtesy, his tone reflecting respect for Sarah's cooperation throughout their investigation, even as he prepared to escalate their response to her continued presence in the area. His radio crackled with routine traffic from other units conducting their morning patrols, the normal rhythms of small-town law enforcement continuing while a federal counterterrorism operation hung in the balance. The sound reminded Sarah that this encounter was just another routine call for Martinez and Brooks, despite its extraordinary implications for national security. Brooks moved to assist with what he anticipated would be a straightforward escort to their patrol vehicle, his training emphasizing the importance of professional behavior during arrest procedures, regardless of the suspect's apparent cooperation. His hand rested near his restraint equipment as he prepared to secure someone he believed might be conducting unauthorized surveillance of critical infrastructure. The possibility that he was about to arrest a federal agent working to prevent the very type of attack his actions were designed to detect never entered his calculations. Sarah's decision crystallized in the space between one heartbeat and the next as she realized that maintaining her cover would mean accepting detention that could prevent her from stopping Webb's planned attack on the water supply. The morning meeting between Webb and Jennifer Liu had confirmed that the terrorist operation was moving into its final phase, with the biological agent ready for deployment during the upcoming Salmon Festival, when security would be focused on crowd control rather than perimeter defense. Every hour of delay increased the risk that the attack would proceed as planned, turning the Columbia River into a weapon of mass destruction. The weight of federal authority pressed against Sarah's chest as she reached into her messenger bag, her movements slow and deliberate to avoid triggering defensive responses from officers who were simply doing their jobs with professional competence. Martinez watched carefully as she accessed a concealed compartment, expecting additional photographer documentation that would either support or contradict her cover story. Brooks maintained his tactical position while observing her actions, ready to respond if the situation escalated beyond routine detention procedures. What Sarah withdrew from the hidden compartment would transform their understanding of everything that had transpired during the past hour of investigation and questioning. The leather credential wallet looked different from the photographer identification she had provided earlier, heavier and more substantial with the unmistakable appearance of official government documentation. Martinez recognized the look immediately. From his previous encounters with federal agencies, though he had never expected to see such credentials during a routine suspicious person investigation in Cedar Falls, Sarah opened the wallet with careful precision, revealing CIA identification that established her authority to conduct the surveillance activities that had prompted citizen complaints and police investigation. The credential featured security elements that would be impossible to counterfeit, formatting that matched Martinez's previous experience with federal documentation, and a photograph that clearly matched the woman standing before them. The official seal and agency designation left no doubt about the authenticity of her identification or the legitimate nature of her presence in the park. Martinez studied the credentials with the focused attention of someone who understood the implications of what he was seeing, but needed time to process how federal intelligence operations had come to intersect with his department's routine patrol activities. His experience with interagency cooperation had been limited to occasional coordination during major incidents, never involving CIA operations in his jurisdiction without prior notification. The discovery that a federal agent had been conducting surveillance in Cedar Falls raised immediate questions about coordination protocols and the scope of whatever investigation had brought her to their community. Brooks was less familiar with federal credentials but recognized the immediate shift in the dynamic of their encounter. Understanding that the woman they had approached as a suspicious person was revealed to be operating under official federal authority. His training emphasized cooperation with federal agencies while maintaining appropriate verification procedures. But the specific circumstances of discovering an active CIA operation through citizen complaints about photography created complexities his academy instruction hadn't addressed. The professional implications of potentially interfering with federal counterterrorism efforts weighed heavily on his mind. Sarah spoke quietly as the officers examined her identification, her voice carrying the measured authority of someone accustomed to briefing law enforcement personnel about security matters, without revealing operational details that could compromise ongoing investigations. She explained that she was conducting classified surveillance related to credible threats against critical infrastructure in the Cedar Falls area, requiring extended observation undercover to prevent subjects from realizing they were under federal investigation. The photographer identity was necessary operational security to maintain surveillance effectiveness, while avoiding detection by sophisticated targets. The morning sun cast long shadows across Riverside Park as Martinez and Brooks absorbed the implications of Sarah's revelation, transforming their routine investigation into something that would require resources and protocols far beyond their normal responsibilities. The peaceful setting contrasted sharply with the gravity of learning that federal counterterrorism operations were active in their jurisdiction, protecting their community from threats they hadn't known existed. The weight of national security information settled over them like a physical presence, changing their understanding of their role from investigating suspicious activity to supporting efforts to prevent terrorist attacks. Martinez was the first to respond, his voice reflecting both respect for Sarah's authority and frustration that his department hadn't been informed about federal operations that could affect public safety in their jurisdiction. His questions were professional and legitimate, seeking to understand coordination protocols and his responsibilities for supporting or avoiding interference with ongoing investigations. The tone of his inquiry balanced cooperation with appropriate concern about jurisdictional boundaries and information sharing requirements that effective law enforcement demanded. Sarah's response demonstrated her understanding of local law enforcement concerns, while maintaining necessary operational security about aspects of her mission that remained classified. She explained that her investigation involved individuals who had demonstrated sophisticated awareness of police activities, making broad coordination impossible without alerting subjects to federal interest in their behavior. The surveillance methods and cover identity were specifically designed to avoid official attention that would compromise the investigation's effectiveness and potentially allow dangerous individuals to escape before they could be apprehended. Brooks asked about immediate threat levels and whether the Cedar Falls Police Department should implement special security measures or emergency protocols based on the intelligence Sarah had gathered during her surveillance operation. His question reflected genuine concern for public safety rather than curiosity about classified information, demonstrating the kind of professional responsibility that effective law enforcement required. Sarah's answer would need to provide appropriate guidance without revealing specific operational details that could compromise the investigation if they became known to unauthorized personnel. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching vehicles as additional Cedar Falls police units responded to Martinez's earlier radio communications requesting backup support for their investigation. 2 patrol cars entered the park area, their arrival drawing attention from morning joggers and dog walkers who had been observing the extended official conversation near Bench 47. Sarah watched the approaching officers with growing concern, knowing that each additional person who learned about her true identity increased the risk of operational compromise while making it more difficult to maintain the secrecy necessary for mission success. Sergeant Lisa Thompson emerged from the lead patrol vehicle with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to taking command of complex situations, requiring clear judgment and decisive action. Her 20-year career with Cedar Falls Police had included extensive training in crisis management and interagency operations, making her the natural choice to coordinate whatever response the department's investigation had uncovered. But as she approached the group gathered around the park bench, Thompson had no way of knowing that she was about to become involved in a federal counterterrorism operation that would test every aspect of her professional training and leadership capabilities. Officer David Kim followed Thompson from the 2nd Patrol Vehicle, his relative inexperience with Cedar Falls Police offset by recent academy training that had emphasized homeland security awareness and federal cooperation protocols in ways that older officers hadn't received during their initial preparation. Kim's background included military service that had provided familiarity with security clearances and classified operations, experience that would soon prove valuable for understanding the implications of Sarah's revealed identity and the requirements for maintaining the operational security during multi-agency coordination. Thompson approached with the professional demeanor that senior law enforcement officers brought to uncertain situations, prepared to take command while also ready to defer to appropriate authority if circumstances warranted such cooperation. Her opening questions to Martinez reflected both her desire to understand what had prompted the backup request and her recognition that the extended conversation suggested something more complex than routine, suspicious person investigation. The tone of her inquiry indicated someone prepared to handle whatever the situation required, while maintaining professional standards and departmental protocols. Martinez briefed Thompson on the essential details of their encounter with Sarah, explaining that what had begun as investigation of citizen complaints about suspicious photography had evolved into contact with a federal agent, conducting classified operations in their jurisdiction without prior coordination with local law enforcement. His summary was accurate and professional, but it also reflected his own uncertainty about proper procedures for handling such situations and the responsibilities his department now carried for supporting or avoiding interference with ongoing federal investigations. Thompson's response demonstrated the experienced judgment that had made her effective in supervisory roles, asking appropriate questions to understand both the immediate situation and its broader implications for department operations and public safety. Her inquiry about credential verification reflected proper caution rather than distrust, recognizing that established protocols required confirmation of authority before local resources could be committed to supporting federal operations. Request was reasonable and necessary, but it also created additional opportunities for operational compromise if sensitive information was not handled with appropriate security measures. Kim stepped forward when Thompson requested credential verification, his military background having provided familiarity with the security features and formatting of various federal identification documents that civilian officers might not recognize immediately. His examination of Sarah's CIA credentials was thorough and professional, confirming their authenticity while demonstrating the kind of interagency knowledge that would be essential for maintaining proper cooperation during ongoing operations. His verification provided Thompson with the confidence she needed to proceed with appropriate support while implementing necessary security protocols. Sarah found herself conducting an impromptu briefing for 4 Cedar Falls police officers about aspects of her mission that she had hoped to keep completely classified, but she recognized that their cooperation was now essential for preventing the planned terrorist attack without compromising broader investigative objectives. Her explanation emphasized the time-sensitive nature of the threat, while stressing the critical importance of maintaining operational security to prevent subjects from realizing they were under federal surveillance. The balance between information sharing and security protection required careful judgment about which details were necessary for local law enforcement, cooperation without revealing intelligence that could compromise other aspects of the investigation. The briefing continued for nearly an hour as Sarah provided the officers with enough information to understand the scope of the threat while maintaining necessary classification about operational methods and intelligence sources that remained active in other investigations. She explained that Marcus Webb's New Dawn coalition was planning to introduce biological agents into the Columbia River water treatment facility during the upcoming Salmon Festival, when security attention would be focused on crowd control rather than perimeter defense. The attack was scheduled for the following week, with Jennifer Liu providing insider access through her position as a maintenance supervisor at the facility. Thompson immediately grasped the implications of what Sarah was describing, recognizing that the planned attack would affect not only Cedar Falls, but the entire Columbia River region served by the treatment facility. Her questions about emergency response protocols and evacuation procedures reflected the kind of comprehensive planning that major incidents required, but they also highlighted the challenges of maintaining operational security while preparing for potential mass casualty scenarios. The balance between preparation and secrecy would require careful coordination between federal and local agencies with different capabilities and jurisdictional responsibilities. Martinez asked about arrest timelines and coordination procedures, wanting to understand how his department could support the federal operation without compromising its effectiveness or creating jurisdictional conflicts that could hinder successful prosecution of the terrorists. His questions reflected both professional interest in law enforcement outcomes and personal commitment to protecting the community where he had served for 15 years. Sarah's responses would need to address tactical considerations of timing, while explaining strategic requirements for dismantling the broader network before it could relocate operations or activate alternative attack plans. Brooks focused on practical aspects of supporting federal operations, asking about surveillance protocols and whether local officers would be needed to assist with monitoring activities during the final phases of the investigation. His questions demonstrated genuine commitment to public safety and willingness to contribute whatever resources his department could provide to prevent the planned attack. But they also reflected inexperience with federal operations that made clear communication about roles and boundaries essential for effective cooperation without operational compromise. Kim's military intelligence background enabled him to ask more sophisticated questions about the terrorist network structure and capabilities, inquiring whether the Cedar Falls cell was part of a larger organization with operations in other regions that could pose additional threats if the local investigation was compromised. His understanding of counterterrorism operations helped him grasp the broader implications of Sarah's mission and the potential consequences if the investigation was exposed before all network members could be identified and apprehended. His questions reflected strategic thinking that would be valuable for comprehensive mission success. Thompson concluded the briefing by establishing clear protocols for communication and coordination during the remaining phases of the operation, ensuring that her officers understood both their responsibilities and their limitations in supporting federal counterterrorism efforts. Her instructions reflected understanding of the situation's gravity while maintaining the professional standards that effective law enforcement required. The morning's events had transformed routine patrol duties into participation in national security operations, but her department was prepared to meet whatever challenges that responsibility entailed. As the extended briefing concluded and the additional patrol units prepared to resume modified duties that would support the federal operation while maintaining normal community policing functions, Sarah faced the reality that her mission had been fundamentally altered by the morning's events. The operational security she had maintained for months was now shared among multiple local law enforcement officers, creating both opportunities for enhanced effectiveness and vulnerabilities that would require careful management during the critical final phase of preventing Webb's planned attack. The forced collaboration with Cedar Falls police represented significant deviation from original mission parameters, but it also provided local knowledge and resources that could prove decisive for successful intervention. The morning sun climbed higher above the Columbia River, illuminating the peaceful community that remained unaware of how close it had come to experiencing a devastating terrorist attack. Sarah gathered her surveillance equipment and prepared to continue her intelligence collection with the knowledge that local law enforcement was now aware of her mission and committed to supporting its success without compromising operational effectiveness. The revelation of her identity had created new challenges and opportunities, but it had also established partnerships that exemplified the interagency cooperation essential for protecting American communities from those who would use critical infrastructure as weapons of mass destruction. The collaboration between Sarah's CIA operation and the Cedar Falls Police Department would serve as a model for federal and local law enforcement cooperation, demonstrating how professional judgment and mutual respect could overcome initial suspicions and jurisdictional concerns to achieve shared objectives of protecting innocent lives. The success of their coordination would prevent not only the immediate threat to the water treatment facility, but also disrupt the broader domestic terrorism network that had been planning similar attacks across the Pacific Northwest region. 6 months later, the memorial bench installed near the spot where Sarah's surveillance had documented the terrorist network's final planning meeting bore a simple inscription recognizing public service without revealing the classified details of the operation that had saved thousands of lives. Martinez, Brooks, Thompson, and Kim had all received federal recognition for their professionalism and courage, though the specific nature of their contribution remained classified for ongoing security reasons. Their response to discovering federal operations in their jurisdiction had demonstrated the excellence in law enforcement that made effective counterterrorism possible through seamless cooperation between agencies with different capabilities and responsibilities. The ceremony honoring the Cedar Falls Police Department was brief and understated, reflecting the classified nature of the operation and the ongoing requirements that prevented public discussion of operational details. Sarah attended in her dress uniform, no longer disguised but representing the intelligence community's appreciation for local law enforcement officers who had chosen duty over bureaucracy when faced with circumstances that tested their commitment to protecting others. Their willingness to trust federal authority while maintaining their dedication to community safety had exemplified the best aspects of American law enforcement cooperation during national security crises. Marcus Webb and Jennifer Liu were serving consecutive life sentences in federal prison, along with other New Dawn Coalition members who had been arrested during coordinated raids, following Sarah's intelligence collection and the information provided through local law enforcement cooperation. The biological agents they had planned to use were secured and destroyed, while the water treatment facility implemented enhanced security measures that made similar attacks significantly more difficult to execute. The successful prevention of the planned attack had disrupted domestic terrorism networks across multiple states and prevented what intelligence analysts concluded would have been the most devastating attack on civilian infrastructure since September 11th. The peaceful scene at Riverside Park offered no visible reminder of the life and death decisions that had once been made at Bench 47, where a CIA agent had chosen to trust local law enforcement and police officers had chosen to support federal authority despite personal and professional risks that such cooperation entailed. The successful prevention of the terrorist attack would remain classified for decades, but its impact would be measured in the thousands of lives that continued because dedicated public servants had fulfilled their oath to protect and defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic, regardless of the personal cost that such service required. The morning breeze carried the scent of cedar and river water across the park as visitors enjoyed the tranquil setting without knowing that their safety had once depended on the quiet professionalism of an intelligence officer and law enforcement. Officers who understood that their duty extended beyond individual responsibilities to encompass shared obligations for protecting the nation they served. The terrorist attack that could have poisoned an entire region had been prevented not through dramatic action or heroic gestures, but through the careful coordination of ordinary people making extraordinary choices when faced with circumstances that tested their commitment to protecting innocent lives from those who would use their community's resources as weapons of destruction. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.